Hi, Mikey.
Hi, Mikey.
Mr.
Sorry.
What? Yeah. No, it's not.
All right, so we're gonna talk about congruent triangles today. We've talked about congruent segments. We've talked about congruent angles. Today we're going to talk about congruent triangles. And congruent triangles are triangles that are the same size and the same shape. Meaning, if you took two congruent triangles and you put them on top of one another, they should overlap perfectly. Okay? Now, each triangle, we know, has 3 angles and 3 sides. Also, if all 6 of the corresponding parts of 2 triangles are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So this is important. This is the big deal of this lesson. So how do you know that 2 triangles are congruent? Well, all 3 angles of one triangle have to be congruent to all 3 angles of another triangle. All 3 sides of this one has to be congruent to all 3 sides of this one. Only then do we know that the triangles are congruent. Okay? So that's what it means. That's pretty much the definition of congruent triangles. Okay? Congruent triangles are when all 6 parts of one are congruent to all 6 parts of the other. Now, suppose you're told that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EFG. Okay? If that's the case, the vertices of the 2 triangles correspond in the same order as the letters naming the triangle. Okay? Right, so if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EFG, that means if A comes first here, that means it's congruent to the first letter of the other one. Okay? So if A comes first, then it's congruent to the first one here, which is E. If B is the middle one, that means it's congruent to the middle one of this, F. If C is the last one, that means it's congruent to the last one here, G. Okay? So this is called a congruence statement. All right? You can write a congruence statement with the letters mixed around as long as you maintain the corresponding order. Meaning, you can say triangle CBA is congruent to triangle what? GFE. Okay? The letters have to match. Does that make sense? So now, having said that, what are the corresponding congruent angles here? We know that angle A is congruent to angle E. Angle B is congruent to what? Angle F. And what about angle C? Angle G. Sides are the same situation. Okay? So if I say segment AB, then that would have to be equal to EF right here. Okay? First and second letters, first and second letters. Congruent. And then if I say segment AC, that would be congruent to segment what? AG. And the last one is segment BC, and that's congruent to segment FG. Okay? If you don't maintain the order, you will not get full credit. So please watch out for this. All right. Third angles theorem. This follows from the triangle sum theorem. So basically what it says is, suppose you have these 2 triangles right here, okay? And we're told that C and K are congruent. B and J are also congruent, that means the last one that we don't have any information about is also congruent. So A is also congruent to L. Okay? So if you're told that two triangles here are congruent to two triangles there, the third ones must also be congruent. Are there any questions so far? Yeah.
That means the sides are also congruent.
Not well, okay. So once you know that the triangles are congruent, yes, the sides are. But just knowing that the angles are congruent wouldn't be enough to say that the sides are congruent.
What would be that? That the triangles are congruent?
Right. The triangles are congruent. And then in this chapter, we're going to learn about all these other theorems. Okay? So this is everybody's favorite theorem or law in geometry. The name of it is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And if we just take the first letters C, P, C, T, C, that's what we have. Okay? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. C, P, C, T, C. Okay? So it says two triangles are congruent if and only if their corresponding parts are congruent. And you can look at it the other way. In fact, most of the time we use it in the reverse order. If two triangles are congruent, then all their corresponding parts are congruent. Okay? So suppose I know that triangle 1 is congruent to triangle 2, then I immediately know this angle is congruent to that angle. This side is congruent to that side. Okay? All right. So here, identify the congruent angles and sides and the congruent triangles. So here, what are the congruent triangles? All right, so you see how one side here is congruent to one side here, and here's the second side, and here's the third side. Okay, so the triangle on the right is congruent to the triangle on the left. So who can tell me a congruence statement here? Maya.
Triangle ACF is congruent to triangle DF.
Triangle ACF is congruent to triangle DBF, right? All right, and the way you're going to do it is this. You write you write the name of one of the triangles, ACF, right? And then you say, okay, A matches with which one? D. So I write D next. C matches with B. So I write that next. Okay? F matches with F. So I write that next. That's literally how you do it. You just transcribe. Okay? All right. So Joanna, can you give me one pair of corresponding angles that are congruent? Like, for example, angle A is congruent to angle D. What's another pair?
Oh, C and D.
Right, angle C is congruent to angle B. And what's another one? Right, so here we have to specify angle AFC is congruent to angle DFB. Okay? And now I need 3 pairs of sides. Okay? Liam, can you give me one of the pairs of sides? DB is congruent to AC. What's another one? Right? BF to CF. And AF to DF, right. All right. Okay, so same thing here. The triangle on the right is congruent to the triangle on the left. So what I do is I write the name of one of them. So for example, I'm going to say, okay, triangle HTK is congruent to triangle. All right, now, I know that K matches with J, okay? What does HT match with? So so if I say HTK, I'm going to say THJ. Well, so if I if I have H and T, okay, those are on either side of these, right? So this one and this one. And you see how these two triangles are flipped over? That means you have to keep the order the same. Okay? All right, so corresponding angles. We know that angle J is congruent to angle K. Well, they're not all congruent to each other. Okay? So I know, for example, that this one, look at this one. This is between the side with one tick mark and the diagonal. The angle that's between the side with one tick mark and the diagonal is this one. Okay, so those are congruent. Here, this is the angle between the diagonal side and the one with two tick marks. The diagonal and the one with two tick marks is this one. Okay? So this is how we can match them up. So now, if angle J is congruent to angle K, then angle KHT is congruent to angle HTJ. And what's the last one, the green ones? JHT is congruent to angle KTH. All right? Okay, so corresponding sides. I need a corresponding side. JT to KH, right? And Jesse, what's another one? KT to JH. I try to keep it consistent as much as I can. I mean, it wouldn't be a deal breaker, but I try to keep it consistent as much as I can. And what's another one? What's the last one? HT to HT. Yes. All right? That's the diagonal one. Yeah, that's the side for both of them. They share that side. Turns out that's going to be really, really important later. Okay? All right, so let's do a couple more here. HT. Moving on. Properties of triangle congruence. Okay, so congruence of triangles is reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. Meaning, just like with segments, we can say if segment AB is congruent to segment BC, right, then segment BC is congruent to AC. The same thing applies to triangles. So we can say, for example, triangle A is congruent to triangle B, is congruent to triangle C. It's the same thing. We can use transitive here. Okay, so we can say if triangle A is congruent to triangle B, and triangle B is congruent to triangle C, then triangle A is congruent to C. All right, so we can use all of that stuff. Okay? All right, so here it says draw and label a figure to show the congruent triangles. We're told triangle JKL is congruent to DEF. So what I do is I first draw one of them, and I label J, K, L, and then I'm going to draw another one, okay, and I'm going to call it D, E, F. Now, if it says to show congruent triangles, then this isn't enough. I now have to go and say, all right, JK is congruent to DE, KL to EF, JL to DF, and then the same thing with all the angles. All right, and there. Now I've shown two congruent triangles. Okay, so what are we told here? We're told that angle J is 36, angle E is 64, and what's F? 3x plus 52, okay? And we need to find x, okay? All right, so if we know that J and D are congruent, then I know that D is how big? 36, okay? And now can I find x? Right, so 64 plus 36 plus 3x plus 52 is 180. And how much is this? 3x plus 152 is 180. 3x is 28, so x is 28 over 3. Okay? It will specify on the test. So, and if it doesn't specify, the default is always fraction, simplified fraction. Okay? Now, this homework is going to be due on tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Yes. Okay, so